please pray with me. For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Christ our God, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Every year for the past 14 years, except the lost COVID year of 2020, I have traveled to join a group of preaching colleagues and friends for a week of study, devotion, renewal, and refreshment. When we first started this group 14 years ago, I was there mostly for the scholarly papers written by each participant on biblical texts in order to strengthen our preaching. But as the years have gone on, the primary reason I return is to return to myself, re-examining my own call to ministry with a group of people who know who I am and want me to be my best self as we support each other in the difficult work that is congregational ministry. This peer gathering rotates around the country to the places where my friends serve congregations, from Austin to Chicago, Charlotte, Durham, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Baltimore, Montreat, and Kansas City. This year, I found myself at Wrightsville Beach in North Carolina, standing next to a friend going through a rocky period, looking out across the waters to the vast horizon before us. All of our labor, all of our tears, I told my friend, seem so small in this place. The waves never cease, and each morning we are given another day. As often as I have been to the sea, hiked some extraordinary places on the earth, observed amazing creatures in the wild, I have never lost that sense of amazement, the wonder of creation, the place where we so often arrive with our fears and depart in wonder and amazement. It's that movement from fear to amazement that the disciples experience in this third resurrection appearance from Luke's gospel. The text says that those disciples are startled and terrified and think they have seen a ghost. But after seeing his wounds, their terror shifts to joy, disbelief, and wonder, which is better translated amazement. Joy, disbelief, and amazement, followed by a piece of fish, broiled, not fried, and some Bible study, which is kind of my idea of a perfect afternoon. Now, joy, disbelief, and amazement might seem like an odd pairing until you have experienced something so profoundly good in your own life that it's hard to believe that it's really true. They were so overcome with joy that it seemed too good to be true. As Michelle and I begin the sermon series today on Sacred Ground, it's this joy that has me a bit unnerved, mostly because talk of care of creation in the last 20 years typically evokes more grief, anger, and fear than it does joy. It's fear that comes from knowledge about just how far along we are in our unrelenting destruction of creation. The vast quantities of carbon that we have emptied into our atmosphere, the warming of the planet, the refugee and food crises that are in the works for our children and our children's children. I'm sure that most of my preaching on this topic over the last 10 years has sounded more apocalyptic in a bad way than hopeful, because I want to tell the truth. I don't want to participate in a lie. But resurrection takes disciples cloaked in fear and transforms them into a joyful community, stewarding good news that seems too good to be true. And this is not good news built on denying the cold, hard facts of the damage that human beings have done to the world. It is facing that bad news with gospel-fueled dreams that what you and I do matters profoundly. And this gospel-fueled dream is itself a stance of resistance against imperial colonial lies that we are all too small to do anything together of any significance. The world is in dire need of that dream. A few years ago, Brown Memorial member and teacher Catherine Jenkins invited me to sit in with a group of teachers at her school who had concluded that their strategy of presenting the cold, hard facts about environmental justice to their students was actually having the opposite intended reaction. Instead of being motivated to deepen their involvement, students were concluding that none of their efforts could effectively shift outcomes. They were paralyzed, not energized. Recent scholarship among eco-theologians has come to a similar conclusion. When preachers stand in our pulpits and announce only destruction, we end up accelerating it. We need a new way of thinking about caring for the earth. The Netflix movie, My Octopus Teacher, offers a new way of thinking about our place and relationship with creation. I highly recommend it. The documentary follows naturalist Craig Foster over the period of a year as he makes an unlikely friendship with a small octopus off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa. Now, there's been a lot of chatter on social media about the nature of the relationship between Foster and the octopus, jokes about just how intimate a relationship he has with this octopus. But what captured my imagination was Foster's commitment to swim in the same small section of ocean every day for a period of 10 years. It was his attention to this one small space, which led him to connect deeply with the ocean and with this octopus, a relationship which led Foster to create a conservation organization to capitalize on the movie's success and have a greater impact on the health of the ocean. I don't plan to be making friends with an octopus during my lifetime. But Foster told one critic that you don't need to live near an exotic ocean to connect more deeply with the natural world. If you suddenly took one tree in New York, he said, and figured out how that tree changed over 365 days and what animals interacted with it, what insects live in there, how that tree is surviving, I think that could have quite a large effect on your life. Craig Foster's attention to place helped me see that this is the opposite of how we often speak about climate change, food, and earth care. We say our efforts alone won't make a difference, that there's no individual way to create the kind of systemic changes that we need in order to save the planet, or at least preserve its habitational gift to human beings. But I think Craig Foster shows us that it is the local, personal, intimate engagement that feeds the drive to change conditions for the planet, the personal amazement at the wonder of creation that feeds a commitment to change one's relationship to the planet. Many of you have committed to a particular place, to Rock Rose Farm in Woodbury, or Still Meadow Community Church in Southwest Baltimore, or your own patch of ground in your backyard. You've chosen to be attentive to the small spaces where we live and work because you can make a difference there. But Craig Rivers has me attentive to how the world itself sustains us when we bring that kind of attention to it. It's that attention to a small place that develops within us the patience and vision to be able to see the extraordinary hope that is already built into the earth and its creatures, including the mundane. Which brings me to the topic of dirt. When was the last time you picked up a handful of dirt and took a good look at it? Consider this. Within one handful of dirt, there are more microorganisms than there are humans on the entire planet. Let that sink in for a moment. Not only do we rely on dirt for 95% of what we eat, but it turns out that the soil can absorb a lot more of the carbon that is currently in the atmosphere. Atmospheric carbon is a problem, but it can become soil carbon, which is actually a solution. Recently, the French government called on other nations to join their efforts in increasing soil carbon by just 0.4% each year. If every nation were to do this, we could store 75% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions in the soil. Hope has been built into creation itself. The natural world is already profoundly poised with a hopeful orientation. And if we were to pay closer attention to it, closer attention to the life that is continually given to us each morning with the rise of the sun, those waves that never cease, we would find alongside those wounds that we have inflicted every bit of hope that we need to change the world. I admit it's hard to believe that sometimes. So many of us have been trained to think critically. We can see what's wrong in a situation before we notice all the gifts. Caroline Lewis wrote in a recent commentary about John's gospel, the one that we've been studying in the Wednesday morning Bible study, that there is something painfully true about the human condition that is named in the gospel. That is our tendency towards suspicion when things seem too good to be true. Our disbelief in a God whose sole purpose is the giving of life, especially forever, eternal, and abundant life for the world. But even more so, she says, our general difficulty with a God who wants to be as close as the God of the fourth gospel. That's also the God we see in Luke's story today, a wounded Christ coming close again. A wounded Christ coming close again to deniers, cynics, and those taught by the world to doubt what they have seen. Sharing a meal, eating a piece of fish to show them that this too good to be true situation is actually just the kind of goodness that comes from God. The kind of goodness that is built into creation if only we would learn to cherish it. If only we would learn to emulate it. That's what these disciples end up doing in the text from Acts. They emulate the sharing economy offered to them by Jesus when he was with them, the sharing economy that is reflected in creation itself. I love that this text doesn't start with big ideological questions about capitalism or Marxism or whatever. It starts with real people who figure out what radical sharing looks like, real people who privilege their care for each other as they build an economy that works for everyone. Imagine for a minute if we arranged our lives around that reality. If we emulated the natural world instead of trying to dominate it, subdue it, or compete with it. The best way to build something that supports that kind of ecosystem is to pay attention, like those fearful disciples, to the appearance of the miraculous right in front of us. the reality of God's goodness, interrupting our cycles of fear, offering us life that is too good to be true. Mary Oliver, in her poem Spring, pays that kind of attention to the bear that comes bounding down the mountain in springtime. The bear that teaches her and us just how to love the world. Somewhere, a black bear has just risen from sleep and is staring down the mountain. All night, in the brisk and shallow restlessness of early spring, I think of her, her four black fists flicking the gravel, her tongue like a red fire touching the grass, the cold water. There is only one question: how to love this world. I think of her rising like a black and leafy ledge to sharpen her claws against the silence of the trees. Whatever else my life is, with its poems and its music and its glass cities, it is also this dazzling darkness coming down the mountain, breathing and tasting. All day I think of her, her white teeth, her wordlessness, her perfect love. Friends, we have terribly wounded the planet. And don't close your eyes to the miracles being offered to you each day. That even in its woundedness, creation continues to offer itself as gift to every living thing. Sacred ground, teeming with life, an offering of joy that is almost too good to be true. Amen.